Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are here with Matt and Alex, and we're going to be discussing how to navigate change and maintain continuity in your localization strategy. So, as I mentioned, we have Alex Yanishevsky, the Director of AI and MT Deployments from Smartling, and we have Matt Harris, CEO and founder of Dyspatch. So, thank you both so much for joining, and I will let you give brief introductions, just quick overview of who Smartling is and who Dyspatch is.
Matt, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So my name is Matt Harris. Thanks, Kelsey. So I founded Dyspatch. We help folks address the challenges around email production and building emails across multiple different email sending platforms. So I founded Dyspatch because I used to be an email developer and had to code really tricky HTML for the marketing teams I supported. And that wasn't a great experience. And so Dyspatch kind of pulls that all into an email design system and a drag and drop builder that you can then build and deploy emails to Salesforce, Pardot, Marketo, HubSpot, any sending system. Yeah, so excited to be here today.
So Kelsey, thank you for having us. I'm Alex Yanishevsky. I'm Director of AI and MT Deployments at Smartling. As you mentioned, I've been in the industry for about 20 years, a little bit over that, particularly focusing on machine translation and NLP. So Smartling is a leading language and translation localization software platform that at its underpinnings has a lot of language AI, and you'll see that a little bit further as we talk through kind of the localization strategy. In addition to being a leading translation management platform, Smartling also performs language services.
Great, thank you. And just to cover on today, what we're going to dive into is we're going to look at the challenges and opportunities that come with your localization strategy, maybe in uncertain times, as well as how you can adapt that strategy, as we mentioned, in ways to maintain continuity despite external or internal elements being in flux. And we're going to look at best practices and insights as well. And then finally, we're going to be sharing some practical implementation through a case study that was done with Hunter Industries. So the first thing we're going to cover is the challenges and opportunities, and I want to kick it over to Matt to give perspective here as we look at what challenges we might face.
Alex actually might be leaning in on.
Yeah, I think I was going to lead this one. Yeah. So this is kind of to continue, Kelsey, the theme that you were talking about, right? The idea that we find ourselves in uncertain times, right? An uncertain landscape, lots of changes going on. We don't know, as an enterprise might not know what the future holds, what the future priorities are, how teams will be reorganized, how teams will be restructured, right? So the idea here is, with all of these changes that significantly impact localization efforts, how can we continue to maintain some sort of localization continuity, and basically having some consistency in the face of not being able to predict things, right? So the idea, to set the stage for this, right? The idea that you'll hear, I think, from both Matt and myself is the idea of automation, the idea of standard operating procedures, because we don't know if a particular group might be there in 6 months, right? Or how that group may change, right? So that's from the localization perspective. Matt, I wanted to kind of kick this over to you, right? You're the founder of Dyspatch, you're the CEO. So you're at the helm of a company. What kind of challenges keep you up at night? What are you struggling with, and how are you trying to overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, localization actually and globalization is a huge challenge. I think, like a lot of SaaS businesses, we're all global by default now. Like, you can't control who's going to find your website and sign up for your service, and so especially working with enterprise, offering support in different time zones and different languages is a really key challenge we're looking at today. But the take we have, or I have, in response to these things is kind of like automate process wherever we can. It's going to help us respond better and faster, and help us as well cover gaps when we're short staffed, or if we're hiring really quickly. Process automation helps kind of new people slot in and keep track of like what's going on, gives us some stability.
So I think, Kelsey, if we go to the next slide, perfect. Right. So we kind of talked about the challenges. You see that this is kind of a nice bookend to how do we address those challenges, right? What are actually the opportunities to navigate this change and also set in place as I said, a continual, a consistent workflow that will lead to growth. So one of the things to focus on here is the idea of being open and onboarding new tools. So really auditing your existing processes and looking at processes that are inefficient and automating them and basically making sure that the new process that you have is simplified, it's automated, and it's also scalable. Right. Another idea is consolidating customer communications within a brand or umbrella, right? As you're launching a new brand or redesign. And Matt, I'll ask you if you can. That's a lot more what Dispatch specializes on. If you could comment on that too in a moment, right? And lastly, and you'll see this ultimately as we get to the case study. Again, this kind of theme, this leitmotif that the tools that you're going to use, those tools really need to be intuitive and user friendly, right? And I think you'll see that in the case study, that what makes each tool in and of itself is very easy, and therefore integrating them is very, very easy. So it's very easy for people to onboard, to kind of slot in and immediately start getting value from the tool. But Matt, maybe we can come back to the second bullet here, and you could talk a little bit about customer communications within a brand or umbrella, or launching a new brand.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Two things that come to mind are like the absolute worst case approach to localization, and that's living up and growing up in Canada. We have English and French, and so by default, like government communications have to be bilingual. But the approach to email that government of Canada frequently takes is have an English email and then have a French email all in one. And if you're an email marketer, you'll likely have a light bulb. There's lots of challenges to that, like length of email skyrockets. It's really confusing, and other things. And so I've actually seen companies in Canada take the same approach. And I can't think of like a worse way to approach localization than just dump in like all of the different languages you need in one. So that's kind of, I think, a baseline for when you're thinking about a new brand or launch. Kind of, you do need to take that approach of treating each one kind of individually and uniquely, and uh, like do that efficiently, but as well like treat each market you're addressing as its own unique market and with its own unique challenges, kind of like formulate your message. And so it might be tempting to take the shortcut of the English and French email, to use the Canadian example, but I think the opportunity here is to like unlock a new market with like a fresh take on your brand that's going to speak to those consumers.
Yeah, and maybe if I could add to that as well, that I think like therein is kind of the kernel of localization, right? You're not just translating content from one language into another, and as you said, just popping it in to continue a stream that becomes a very, very long email. You really have to localize for the nuances of that market, right? And it could be things like date and time, something as simple as that. It could be the fact that colors are interpreted differently. It could be that the wording is going to be different for each market.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a funny one where email is the like most marketers, it's your number one channel and it's your most reliable channel. In certain times, Facebook ads, Google ads, all those things become uncertain channels to drive traffic. But emails, like your number one lifeblood channel to communicate with customers. And it's really short-sighted when you approach globalization, entering a new market, for email to be an afterthought, because that's going to be one of the main ways you communicate with this new customer base. And it's kind of a slap in the face if you don't take that seriously. And at the same time, it's a huge opportunity. I think when you look at failures of major brands going global, like Walmart in going into Japan, or in Germany, they had some struggles as well. like you can take lessons from that and apply that to you as an individual marketer when you're going to a new market. You're doing it on a much smaller scale, but I think one of the cool opportunities here is as well, like the platforms like Dispatch and Smartling make this like way easier than it used to be, and it um, less daunting. I would hope be one of the takeaways, but it's actually much easier to accomplish what we're talking about. It's not super scary. We're not talking about like months of market research or anything else.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And now I want to kind of pivot now that we have these opportunities identified, and you guys mentioned a few um, tools and things that can help make this continuity, continue to, I guess, to put it that way. I want to talk about best practices and things that we can actually implement and use to continue to grow. So Alex, I know you want to speak a little bit about the localization maturity model and how you can implement these best practices to mature over time.
Yeah. So I know, kind of continuing on that theme that Matt mentioned, right? That your email is kind of your face to the world, right? It's your probably first and foremost opportunity to get things right. And conversely, if you get things wrong, repairing that brand damage, can be a very difficult task. So I wanted to kind of step back and kind of explain how, from a localization perspective, we look at it. So from a localization perspective, there's this concept that was introduced by a think tank called Common Sense Advisory, and the idea is that it's a localization maturity model, and you can kind of think of it as like a pyramid where you're going from step 1 to step 2 and ultimately going to step 5, right? And the idea is, as you go further up that model, your process as an enterprise becomes much more transparent, much more automated, and much more efficient, right? So if you think of, for example, step 1, it's basically a manual process, right? Where you may be pasting things into a Google Sheet or an Excel and keeping track of everything there, which is highly, highly inefficient as you get into many, many languages, right? It's already inefficient in, let's say, a source language like English, and the more languages you add, this problem multiplies even more, right? As we kind of go down that line, as localization becomes a bit more important, right, then you begin to think of the concept of automation, right? You become a little bit more mature, and rather than being reactive, you begin to have a process that's a little bit more repeatable, right? So there are a few processes in place. They're updated somewhat regularly, right? From there, as you become more mature, you actually begin to have a managed process. So things are much more formal. They're documented. You have a lot more automation. You have standard operating procedures, right? And basically, localization at this point is something that's being actively managed, and the enterprise is using vendors, right? So at this point, you typically would have some sort of point of contact at an enterprise who has had experience with localization and is the point person who oversees it for the enterprise. And then the last two are really quite mature phases. In the fourth one, where it's centralized or optimized, right? We have a fully managed system of localization, and it's something that's a priority for the company, right? Whereas if you think about a manual process, there isn't someone who's overseeing localization, and it's kind of seen as an afterthought. The higher up you get into this chain, the more localization becomes a priority for the company, because at this point, people realize in senior leadership that a lot of the revenue, 50% or even more, would be made from a non-English market. And that's why localization is so highly prioritized. And in the fifth one, we're talking about a completely transparent, uh, fully automated workflows, and fully well implemented systems. And basically what you're doing there is just keeping track of technology so you can continue improving, right? And Kelsey, if we can go to the next one. So the other thing I wanted to mention, again, you see this theme of automation and transparency and trusted advisors. So kind of two components that I want to leave you with when you do localization. One is you need a translation management platform that will grow with your needs. Even if, let's say, you're at step 2 of this localization maturity model and you ultimately want to get to 4 or 5 within a few years, you want to make sure that you have a platform that can grow with those needs and that can become as scalable as you become more scalable. And what's quite important in these platforms is the ability to fully do automation, to do things like dynamic workflows where you don't need a human in the loop saying, hey, go from here to here. You already put certain logic in and that happens automatically. Transparency is huge because everyone in your organization, in order to plan for localization, you need to have transparency. You need to be able to get reports. You need to see how well you're doing. Last thing I want to leave you here is the idea of a localization partner as a trusted advisor, right? Someone who could help you move up that pyramid and someone who could advise you every step of the way. And this is kind of a nice segue into what Matt will be talking about. So this is actually a screenshot about the use case that we're going to be talking about Hunter. And what's nice, and you'll see this both in Dyspatch and Smartling, is that when linguists work, they have the ability to see context. And that's hugely, hugely important in order to localize and get the best translation possible.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Alex. And I want to hand it over to Matt now. So as we mentioned, the case study that Hunter Industry did with Dyspatch about their localization process. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Kelsey. All right. So just a quick introduction to Hunter Industries. So they're a global manufacturer of irrigation and different water systems. And so if you have like any kind of smart irrigation system in your garden, or you see one of those, it's likely made by Hunter. They were founded in 1981. It's kind of cool. And they're doing business now here in North America as well, really popular Brazil, China, France, and even more. So very global brand. And unlike SaaS companies, which are kind of all the rage these days, Hunter delivers physical products, which is really cool. And actually has its own unique challenge to globalization because distribution for them is very country specific, whether it's done through partner networks or through stores and everything else. And different markets treat distribution really differently as well. So unique challenges there. And the challenge that we saw with Hunter when they partnered up with Dyspatch, that they had skyrocketing demands on their marketing team at the tail end of the pandemic, and huge demands, growing team, and they had a process that wasn't able to keep up with that. So largely using spreadsheets to localize global campaigns, where it was taking upwards of 20 minutes per localization on each campaign, which is a huge amount of time when you're in that many locales and countries. So working with Dyspatch, what we're able to do is build out Hunter's kind of email design system within our platform and integrate it directly into Smartling via APIs, and ultimately integrate that into Hunter's email delivery systems. And ultimately, what they were able to achieve with that is a 15-minute turnaround time for a whole new campaign, and at the press of a button, push that out for localization, and kind of like have that happen all very, very quickly. So huge win and efficiency creation for the Hunter team. But what this really allows them to spend their time on is, like each email now is created and that can go a lot faster. The big thing is then, okay, now we can focus more of that time. Take that 20 minutes we used to spend like in a spreadsheet, and now take that 20 minutes and let's think about, hey, how do we craft this message for the Brazil market? How do we tailor this a little bit? What wins have each different individual market had, and how we can tailor this message and open it up. Baked into this whole process is things like quality assurance and testing. Be able to test, in the US specifically, iPhones are really popular. So let's test all the emails on iPhone. But let's test, Canadian, French, make sure that looks great as well. Anyways, overall, just making a really, really seamless experience. And to Alex's point earlier, I think Dyspatch and Smartling both bring that trusted advisor perspective to this. We both take what we do really serious, and there's a lot of passion internally about that to help them support them. And I think one of the really cool things about this, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll highlight it, is I really believe in process automation as being like one of the key ways we can scale. And I think the process automation is really important. Content creation is like that's the job where we add value. And so with this process automation, Hunter was able to vastly reduce human error within their emails, like small mistakes and other things. And that was also a really, really big win, because I know every email marketer, you're often one of your biggest fears, like baseline, is like, does the email work? Do all the links work? Everything else, your baseline is always like, does it work? And then from there, you try to build up to like, can I add value? Can I add more content? Can I add better assets? Everything else. And so once you start doing the localization, I feel like that fear gets multiplied. And so again, going back to that process automation, it helps reduce a lot of that fear and a lot of that complexity. So you as a marketing team can just really just focus on, how do I provide the best experience in each locale for my customer? And it takes time, but build up that trust that these platforms and this process is going to deliver that each time, without error. Um, and Yeah, some great. I mean, there's a full case study from Hunter we're going to be posting soon. Has some choice quotes, but just a really wonderful experience, and the whole Dispatch team really happy and proud we could work with them through this and find a solution.
Yeah, maybe if I could add to this, to me, what's again kind of putting on my localization hat on, what's particularly neat about this is that this is a fully automated workflow from both companies, right? And you see that with the arrows with the API, right, where you create the content in Dispatch, you push it over into Smartling to start the project, right? So there's a bunch of automations that are happening on the Dispatch side. There are a bunch of automations that are happening on the SmartLink side, where if you've already translated content before, rather than translating it from scratch, you actually pull that content from a database and give it to a linguist, right? And linguists in some cases don't even have to look at the content if it was verbatim exactly the same, right? So linguists are working far more efficiently, right? I kind of alluded to this concept of dynamic workflows, where you can make decision points without a human being. You can have automated checks, and essentially when everything is right, and the idea of working in context and seeing visually what that email will look like in the foreign language, right, in the non-English language. And when it's done in SmartLing, what's cool is that Dispatch actually, again, via API, automatically pulls it back in, right? You don't need to send someone an email and say, hey, I'm done, go get the content. Dispatch actually checks and makes sure that the SmartLink project has been completed, and then using that status pulls it back into the Dispatch.
Cool. Yeah, and I dropped a video in the chat for those who are interested about how the integration works, and also I'll be sharing some more links too. And I think that is all that we have today, unless Matt or Alex, you have anything else to add. Otherwise, we can move into Q&A. So if you have questions, drop them in the Q&A tab.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do Q&A.
Okay, cool. So let's see. The first one that we have, Matt, is for you. As CEO, what do you think about LLMs? LLMs being large language models, and how does ChatGPT affect how you are doing business?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and one frequently comes up in the context of both email creation and localization. So as a company, my approach has been to this is that looking at it from two perspectives. From an individual level, how do we enable individuals to do things like faster, leveraging ChatGPT, especially? Like, can it help us clean up language in an email or something like that quickly? And that's kind of like the individual level, a little bit of the Wild West. From a process standpoint, though, we're really looking at any parts of our process as a company and our software and our offering. Are there ways we can leverage large language models to speed things up, or to replace something that's very manual or something else? What's key in that, though, is that my approach to all of this is that I think content creation and creation in general, I really strictly focus on that. That's like a human input, and that's where we're going to get the highest quality. ChatGPT is really amazing and does some really cool things, but at the end of the day, for key customer communications, for all of these things, I don't think that's something we're going to have AI generating or doing all that. But it's on the process side. That's where I really see the efficiency and the opportunities to do different things. And so that's kind of our approach and what we're doing today.
Okay, cool. Alex, do you have anything to add? Yeah, from a localization perspective.
Yeah. Maybe I can take this from a localization perspective, and maybe tell an interesting story or a joke about this. That's kind of illustrative of our experience. I mean, bottom line, I completely agree with Matt. So kind of the metaphor that I use and the analogy that I use when I talk to people about LLMs is that they're extremely, like things like ChatGPT, GPT-4, Palm, they're extremely promising, right? So to me, it's kind of like you might have a 10-year-old who's completely brilliant, but that doesn't mean that you're going to give him the keys to the car and let him go riding around town, right? So it's kind of like that. We see a lot of amazing promise. We've tested it a lot for machine translation. It's not quite there. It's very close to it. I think it'll become better and better. What we're finding thus far is that we may have better luck taking machine translation and smoothing it using a large language model rather than just starting with GPT as a machine translation provider, for example. One thing that we noticed, and kind of Matt was talking about human in the loop, it's absolutely crucial, because what we've seen in our research is there are lots of hallucinations. You still get lots of issues from like OpenAI where you get like, exceeding quotas, timeouts, and then it'll do absolutely silly stuff. So like I promised a joke, right? I asked it to translate the name of an image. Just basically think, alex.png. What it came back with is, I am a 22-year-old computer science student who's interested in traveling European capitals, right? And we don't know why, right? And like, I mean, it's like funny, but at the same time, it's very dangerous, because you don't want to put that content out there without having some sort of guardrails.
Great. Yeah, thank you. We had one question come in from Masha. In the case with Hunter, do they have sorry, let me start over. In the case with Hunter, do they have an internal localization team, or do they use external vendors?
They primarily use external vendors. There's a contact person on their side, and Smartling is actually one of the language service providers. So we're the platform for Hunter, and we're also one of the localization service providers.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We only have 3 more minutes, and let's see, we had one other come in. Michael asks, is it possible for me to incorporate languages that are not currently listed? If this is not an option, should I utilize the language codes that already exist for my intended local languages? Will this have any impact on the existing machine translation and translation memory resources associated with the existing language code? I think that's
I
for
guess.
you, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I think Alex, that's in your wheelhouse.
I guess I'll answer from the Smartling side. If you're asking on if you're asking from the standpoint of the platform, Smartling actually supports over 400 different locales and locale pairs and locale variants. As far as machine translation, we have a whole slew of integrations to different providers, and we support over 100 languages. That's the short answer. Maybe we can kind of take this offline, and I could give you a more detailed answer specifically for your use case with the languages you're asking about.
Yeah, on the dispatch front, we don't have any restrictions either. We can be quite flexible, and often what we'll do is we got features set around doing like locale groups, and so if you want to use multiple locales, and we can kind of transform locale codes when it goes to Smartling to ensure it kind of conforms with what Smartling supports. We offer a lot of flexibility there as well.
Cool. And the last question is, how do you help maintain brand and voice when I come into Dispatch to localize my email templates?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting question. I touched on this a little bit with like the like globalization examples previously, but I think one of the cool things that we've seen with Smartling customers in particular is their ability to kind of develop a brand voice for particular markets, which is really challenging. On the dispatch front, our kind of like our core of our product suite is giving you kind of like a living brand guideline and email design system, so that you can kind each email can be consistent and use the right branding, color codes, everything else, and making that kind of like a drag and drop experience. But what we don't do today is kind of like help you control that around language as much. But I do think, Alex, that's kind of where Smartling leads in. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're really lead in, and I think it's kind of a good bookend, right? If you're looking at it from the standpoint of logo, we're looking at it from the standpoint of words, right? So Smartling can actually help, our language services team can actually help companies put together a style guide specifically for localizing into a language, as in do this, don't do this, use this voice, don't do this voice, right? Use these glossary, use these terms, don't use these terms, and actually put together glossaries that would be signed off typically by subject matter experts to make sure that we're representing your brand properly in the localized market.
Yeah, I think that's super
Great.
cool.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. This is all we have time for today, and we will be sending out a recording of this session in case you missed any parts of it, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.